Tonight at 10, public trust in policing is said to be shattered following the worst ever case of a serving officer committing rapes and sexual assaults. David Carrick admitted dozens of serious offences against 12 women carried out over 2 decades as the Metropolitan Police missed several opportunities to stop him.
I'm sorry that we've let you down, and you have my absolute word. We're going to be ruthless about sorting this out, about getting these people out of the way and creating an organisation that's better at dealing with the plague of sexual violence that we see in the country.
No justice! No peace! No rapists! Police!
And as protests grow, the Met reveals it's now investigating 1,000 claims of sexual and domestic abuse involving around 800 police officers. And we'll have more on The View from number 10 Downing Street on falling public trust in the police, also tonight. A constitutional showdown as Rishi Sunak says he will block the gender recognition bill passed by Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Parliament.
The government at Westminster stops the government and Parliament here in Edinburgh from doing what it wants to, using a legal device never used before. And yes, you guessed it, that is prompting one heck of a row.
What do we want?
10%!
When do we want it?
Now!
As teachers strike in Scotland, 7 new dates for action are announced for England and Wales, affecting more than 23,000 schools. And after 30 years on the run, the head of the infamous Cosa Nostra mafia has been arrested in Sicily.
On BBC London, David Carrick's crimes raise serious questions about the Met's vetting procedures and culture, and a man's arrested over a shooting at a memorial service in Euston.
Good evening. The public's trust in policing has been shattered. That is the Prime Minister's verdict, following the worst ever case of a serving police officer committing multiple rapes and sexual assaults. David Carrick admitted dozens of serious offences against 12 women carried out over 2 decades as the force missed several opportunities to stop him. He was finally caught when one of his victims decided to report him despite his constant threats. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, apologised to Carrick's victims. He said the force had failed and he was sorry. And Sir Mark went on to reveal that the Met is now investigating 1,000 claims of sexual and domestic abuse involving around 800 police officers. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly has more details.
David Carrick, the serial rapist and violent sexual predator, who for 20 years wore a police uniform. In his private life, he told his victims, "You are my slave," as he controlled and abused them, subjecting them to appalling acts of degradation.
Not only have we let down the women in this case, the survivors who've courageously come forward, I completely recognise that's going to be the reaction of many women across London and indeed more widely. All I can say is, I'm sorry that we've let you down.
In his job, Carrick carried a gun as he guarded the Houses of Parliament as part of the Met Police's Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. This was the same unit that the disgraced officer Wayne Couzens was in. In public, off-duty, Carrick was seen as a cocky character. This was him in 2020, the year before his arrest. Behind the smiling face was a monster, and there were warnings ahead of his police career. Before he joined the Met, he was a suspect in 2 offences involving a former partner. The following year, he passed the Met's vetting procedure. Between 2002 and 2009, he was accused of a number of incidents involving women, including harassment and domestic violence. It was in 2009 that he successfully applied to join what is now the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. 7 years later, he was a suspect in a harassment complaint. 12 months after that, he got through his police vetting again. In 2019, he faced another allegation of domestic violence. And then in 2021, there was a rape complaint made against him.
A perpetrator like Carrick had demonstrated really egregious behaviour over a long period of time, but none of the dots were joined. He was able to hide in plain sight and remain on the force when he should not have been there.
The Met has admitted failings in this case as recently as the summer of 2021. At that time, the force was told that David Carrick was under investigation by Hertfordshire police over a rape allegation. He was put on restricted duties but was allowed to carry on working. This was 4 months after the rape and murder of Sarah Everard. David Carrick in the dock today. He will be sentenced next month.
The victims who suffered at the hands of David Carrick have finally seen justice. It is their courage in standing up against this heinously abusive man, a police officer, that has helped to secure his conviction.
It's Hertfordshire police who brought Carrick to justice. The focus now shifts to the Metropolitan Force and its failure to root out a criminal in uniform. June Kelly, BBC News at Southwark Crown Court.
As we saw there, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner apologised to Carrick's victims for the force's failings and revealed that the force was now investigating around 1,000 sexual and domestic abuse claims involving some 800 police officers. Our Home Editor Mark Easton has more details.
Trust, the bedrock of our policing system, has been repeatedly eroded by the actions of Metropolitan Police officers. The handling of this vigil for Sarah Everard, murdered by a serving Scotland Yard officer, became symbolic of the fractured relationship between the force and the citizens it serves, particularly women. The Carrick scandal is another blow to that.
Finding out that Carrick was accused of rape in 2021 and was not taken off of active duty, was not suspended from the force in the midst of the biggest scandal that the Met had ever faced, basically tells me all I need to know.
Last October, a report commissioned by Scotland Yard called for zero tolerance of racism and misogyny, with too many officers accused of sexual misconduct and domestic abuse remaining on the front line. The author of that report, Baroness Louise Casey, today called for the Carrick case to be included in an ongoing independent inquiry. Louise Casey's report was prompted by a series of highly damaging scandals, racist, sexist and homophobic text messages sent by officers in Charing Cross, including one male officer telling a female colleague, "I would happily rape you." Metropolitan Police constables jailed for taking photos of 2 murdered sisters and sharing them on WhatsApp. And then, of course, there was the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Scotland Yard police officer in 2021.
I'm sad to say there will be some cases where in the past we should have been more assertive and looked to throw officers out, and we haven't done. We're going to turn all those stones over, we're going to come to the right conclusions. I say we'll be ruthless about rooting out those who corrupt our integrity. You have my absolute assurance on that.
Division! Shut!
Every one of the Met's 45,000 officers and staff are having their records checked against the National Computer Database for Convictions or Intelligence. An internal standards unit is already investigating more than 1,000 domestic and sexual abuse allegations against around 800 individuals.
This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change.
Last week, Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley unveiled what he called his turnaround plan to restore trust in the Met, with a focus on the integrity of officers as well as men who prey on women and children. Sir Mark said he was going to identify the 100 most predatory and dangerous men in the capital. Until recently, of course, one of those 100 was an officer within his own force. There are many brave and compassionate police officers in Scotland Yard, but they all operate on the basis of trust. And tonight the Prime Minister said trust in the Met had been shattered. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Today's other main story. For the first time since the Scottish Parliament was reconvened back in 1999, the government at Westminster has decided to block a piece of Scottish legislation. The bill in question is the Gender Recognition Bill, which members of the Scottish Parliament approved last month. Now, the aim of the bill is to simplify and to speed up the process by which a person can change their legally recognised gender. Ministers at Westminster say that the bill would have an adverse effect on equality laws which apply to all of England, Scotland and Wales. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, says the decision to block the bill is an outrage and warned that the Scottish Government would challenge the decision in court. Our political editor Chris Mason is in Edinburgh tonight with the latest.
Huw, this matters because of the issue in question, but it also matters because it asks some of the most important questions in politics. How are we governed? By whom? And from where? Today, the tensions between the UK government and the Parliament and the government here in Edinburgh were exposed once again. It's awkward and a row is only just beginning. This is the ceremonial mace. It represents the Scottish Parliament's authority. We're seeing it here at the opening of its 6th session the year before last. And next, the Crown of Scotland, a symbol of royal authority. But power is shared in the UK, and with a rule book. All the laws that are passed here are checked to make sure they don't contradict with laws for the whole of the UK. If they do, they can be stopped. But that is a power that has never been used before. Never, that is, until tonight. In a statement, the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, said, "I have decided to make an order under Section 35 of the Scotland Act 1998, preventing the Scottish Parliament's Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from proceeding to royal assent. I'm concerned that this legislation would have an adverse impact on the operation of Great Britain-wide equalities legislation."
And the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill is passed.
This was the moment just before Christmas when the Scottish Parliament strongly endorsed changing the law. A moment of triumph for some, disappointment for others. This was legislation long in the making, prompting celebrations, resignations, rows, rebellions. So what did it hope to achieve? It would have made the process of legally changing gender faster. Younger people would also have been able to apply, the age limit dropping from 18 to 16, and it would have been easier because the requirement for medical reports to back up an application would have been dropped. The plan was days away from becoming law. That isn't going to happen, for now at least. Speaking before tonight's announcement, the First Minister's view was clear.
I think it will be using trans people, already one of the most vulnerable, stigmatised groups in our society, as a political weapon, and I think that will be unconscionable and indefensible and really quite disgraceful.
Labour say the UK and Scottish governments need to get round the table and find a solution to this. But it looks like it'll be the courts that soon beckon now. Chris Mason, BBC News in Edinburgh.
Well, as Chris was explaining there, the bill passed by the Scottish Parliament would lower the age from 18 to 16 at which people can apply for that legal document confirming a change of gender. So let's get more on the background and the detail from our LGBT and identity correspondent, Lauren Moss. Lauren.
Thanks, Huw. So let's go through some of those key points of the bill. It was passed by the Scottish Parliament last month, and it will make it easier for people who live in Scotland or were born there to change their legal sex that's listed on their birth, marriage and death certificates. It'll remove the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, the sense of unease someone experiences if their gender identity or the perception of their gender is different to the sex registered when they were born. It'll lower the age that people can apply from 18 to 16, and they can do so after 3 months of living in their gender or 6 months for under 18s instead of 2 years. Now, at the minute, around 25 to 30 people change their legal sex in Scotland every year. The Scottish Government estimates this could increase tenfold to about 300 a year. 9 other countries in Europe have a form of self-ID. Now, while we don't know how many people in Scotland may apply, the census in England and Wales found that 96,000 people identify as transgender men and women.
The current process to get that gender recognition certificate is so long, costly and dehumanising that I've not been able to access that myself, even though I've been out as trans since I was 18. I'm 23 now, but I've been on the waiting lists for the Gender Identity Clinic for 4.5, nearly 5 years now.
So why is it controversial? Well, critics are concerned about how the bill could come into conflict with equalities law in the rest of the UK, which Scotland doesn't have the power to make changes to. For example, if somebody changes their legal sex, what's the impact on access to single-sex spaces like domestic abuse refuges or schools in the case of under 18s? Now, under the Equality Act, certain spaces can exclude transgender people if there are justifiable reasons over privacy or safety. And some campaigners feel there needs to be more scrutiny.
We've been hearing from women across the political spectrum, both sides of the independence question, who are absolutely relieved and pleased that this has happened. So I think there's a broad consensus of support from women that the UK government at least have taken our rights seriously.
10 years ago, the political debate was over equal marriage. Now it's gender recognition, and this one is far from over. Huw.
Lauren, thanks very much once again. Lauren Moss there with the background to the bill that we are talking about. And we mentioned earlier that, of course, this has now produced a constitutional confrontation, if you like. So let's go back to Edinburgh. And our Scotland editor there is James Cook. James, what do you make of the situation that's now been created, and how do you see it developing?
Well, it's certainly interesting, to say the least, Huw. And last Thursday at dinner in Inverness, I'm told that Rishi Sunak was joking about stealing the chips that came with Nicola Sturgeon's steak. We were told that the Prime Minister was in the Highlands on a charm offensive. Well, just 4 days on, and things don't look so convivial between the pair. To be honest, you can overstate how convivial they were in the first place. There were some serious disagreements at that private dinner. But now, as you say, we're in a big row, a big political row and a constitutional row. So where do we go from here? Well, there is a suggestion from the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, that perhaps the Scottish Parliament here could consider redrafting this legislation, although some people within the UK government even accept that doing so would actually gut the provisions of the bill, gut the intent of the bill, and that really that's a non-starter. What are the other options? Well, we might see the Scottish Government, or at least its lawyers, marching up the Royal Mile here to the Court of Session and mounting a legal challenge. I think the sense here is that is very likely to happen indeed, although there's not unanimity within the SNP that they would necessarily win that challenge, despite the confident-sounding words of Nicola Sturgeon. Either way, wherever we go here, it is clear that the culture wars and the Constitution are coming together in a pretty explosive way.
James, many thanks again. James Cook with analysis there at Holyrood, our Scotland editor. Teachers are to strike over pay in England and Wales on 7 dates in February and March. The National Education Union, that's the UK's largest education union, said the strikes would affect more than 23,000 schools in England and Wales. The Education Secretary at Westminster, Gillian Keegan, says that she does plan to meet union leaders later this week. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, has the story.
What is the novel saying about society then?
This summer they're facing their GCSEs. And after COVID disruption, now teachers' strikes. At this secondary school in Sheffield, their year group is a priority.
The intention will be to remain open and to make sure that there's no lost learning time for the students. Obviously, we don't want to have to close the school, but in the event that we're unable to remain open to all year groups, we'll go to a virtual school just like we did during COVID.
I think everybody's already got their log on, so we should be fine.
In England, the government advice to schools is to try to stay open. In updated guidelines, it will stress vulnerable pupils should be in school.
For many teachers, this has been an incredibly difficult decision. They're acutely aware of all the disruption that COVID caused to children's education. But at the same time, for most of them, the value of their pay has fallen hugely in the last 10 years.
So that is such a terrible decision to have to make.
For teachers like Matthew, the real value of pay has fallen sharply, up to 13% since 2010.
So I had to vote for yes, unfortunately, and I feel sort of going against all my morals and what I've strive for when I talk to the Year 11 students, but I don't think that unless we make some significant action, I don't think the government will change.
The union leader told me pay should keep up with the cost of living. But what about the disruption for pupils?
There could be disruption. We want to minimise that by getting the government to talk to us. But I just want to repeat to parents, the fact that we haven't got enough teachers, the fact that we haven't got qualified teachers, the fact that we haven't got special needs support assistants, that is damaging children's education every day.
This evening, the Education Secretary in England said this was not the time for strikes.
It is deeply disappointing for parents and children. And of course it will have an impact. It will have an impact on children's education. We all know that during the pandemic they have had a lot of disruption to their education.
The strikes in Scotland have gone from national to local. The first in England and Wales will be in a couple of weeks' time. Brownman Jeffries, BBC News.
The Metropolitan Police say they're questioning a 22-year-old man on suspicion of attempted murder following a shooting in central London on Saturday. Gunmen opened fire outside a church near Euston Station as mourners left a memorial service for a young woman and her mother. A 7-year-old girl is in a critical condition and 5 others were also hurt. Our correspondent Celestina Olulode has the latest.
Chaos inside a central London church. People scramble and run in all directions as shots are fired outside. Emergency services quickly arrive to the scene of the shooting. Eyewitnesses say they saw a woman lying on the pavement.
My daughter witnessed the lady falling onto the side road. She was bleeding. Everyone was running in, trying to save her from bleeding too much. And that actually traumatized my children. Since Saturday night, they've been actually finding it difficult to sleep.
Filmed on CCTV moments before the incident, a black Toyota SUV approaches the church. After a gunshot is heard, people panic and run down the road. 4 women and 2 girls aged 7 and 12 were injured here on Saturday. Now, police say that the younger child remains in a stable but life-threatening condition, whilst one of the other victims, a 48-year-old woman, sustained injuries which could be life-changing.
The shooting on Saturday in Euston was a senseless act of violence. To carry a gun, let alone use a gun in London, is unacceptable, but to use a gun at a funeral beggars belief.
People were at St Aloysius Church to remember the lives of Fresia Calderon and her daughter Sara Sanchez. Both died from medical conditions in November. A 22-year-old man was arrested in North London yesterday afternoon. Police continue to appeal for eyewitnesses. Celestina Olulode, BBC News.
The Foreign Office has confirmed that a British man died in yesterday's plane crash in Nepal. Local officials have named him as Ruan Callum Crichton. Rescuers have given up hope of finding any survivors. There were 72 passengers and crew on board the Yeti Airlines flight. It went from Kathmandu to the tourist town of Pokhara, but it crashed just before landing there. Our correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan sent this report from near the site of the crash.
Scattered across the riverbank, fragments of Flight 691. Windows still intact. Seats mangled close by. Like pieces of a broken toy. The remnants of a national tragedy.
So you saw the plane come down from the sky?
Yes.
People living near the gorge, like Indira Prasad Subkota, say they're thankful the plane didn't land on their houses close by.
I looked at the sky and saw the plane was slowing down. It was shaking. To me, it looked like one of the propellers wasn't working.
Now, hundreds of police officers are continuing their work here. They've given up hope on finding any survivors, but now as they pick through the wreckage, they're trying to find clues to work out how this tragedy happened.
Today, rescue teams recovered the flight's recorder, which they hope will shed more light on what happened. Nepal has a history of fatal air tragedies. The mountain terrain and unpredictable weather can be tricky to navigate. Outdated aircraft and weak regulation have also been blamed for previous accidents. This footage appears to show the flight's last moments. It came down just before landing at Pokhara Airport. Officials told the BBC the pilot asked to change runways on approach. After he was given the clear, the plane crashed. 21-year-old Neera Chatyal, a regular flyer with Yeti Airlines, was on board the fateful flight. A folk singer, she was on her way to perform at a festival.
She was your friend?
Yes.
Tonight, her friends say they're still waiting for her body to be released.
She was a very talented artist and used to sing folk songs. I have no words to describe the loss.
As armed police guard the hospital, families wait outside. It's been a painful few days for Nepal. This country still wants closure. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Pokhara.
Police in Romania are expanding their investigation into the social media personality Andrew Tate. They've seized a fleet of luxury cars from his compound in Bucharest and also raided 7 more properties. Tate is a British-American citizen who's been detained, along with his brother, as part of an investigation into allegations of human trafficking and rape. Both men deny all the allegations. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson has this report.
Weeks after police came for their owner, they returned for his cars. The power of a Ferrari, paralysed in the grip of a dowdy police truck. Whatever the truth about life behind these walls, its secrets are now being scrutinised by investigators. This fleet of luxury cars, the toys of a successful businessman, or the proceeds of a trafficking ring. Bogdan Stancu is in charge of security at the Tate compound and describes himself as a close friend of the brothers.
Why everybody comes now and talk and make a lot of statements in front of the media and in front of the police about how bad is Andrew Tate?
You doubt all the women, but you never doubt Andrew.
I never doubt Andrew.
Why do you doubt all the women and not Andrew?
Because they are young and stupid. Very simple.
If you're living in the Western world, this is probably 40% of the reason I moved to Romania.
In an online video, Andrew Tate said he moved to Romania in 2017 in part for what he saw as its more lenient approach to sexual assault claims. He and his brother Tristan are being held in detention for 30 days while police investigate whether they set up a trafficking operation and forced women to work online in adult chat rooms. They're also investigating an allegation of rape. Both men deny the charges.
I've never seen any of them being aggressive.
Police have identified 6 women as potential victims, but last week 2 of them publicly denied any mistreatment by the Tate brothers.
No. I've never been threatened. If I had been, I wouldn't have been stupid enough to stay in that house. I have a tattoo on my left arm that says Tate Girl, which I got out of respect for them.
Andrew Tate's reputation hangs on this case, but Romania's does too. Its message that trafficking claims will be investigated, no matter how rich or famous you are. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Bucharest.
After 30 years on the run, Italy's most wanted mafia boss has been arrested in Sicily. Matteo Messina Denaro was detained in a clinic where he was receiving medical treatment. He's alleged to be the boss of the notorious mafia group known as Cosa Nostra. More than 100 members of the armed forces were involved in his arrest. Our correspondent Frank Gardner has the story.
Caught at last. Italy's most wanted mafia fugitive, Matteo Messina Denaro, had been on the run for 30 years. Local residents in Palermo thanked the police.
Bravissimi, bravi.
They tracked him down to a private medical clinic where he was being treated for cancer. For Italy, this is huge. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni flew down to congratulate those who helped catch him. It's a day of celebration, she says, and now we can tell our children the mafia can be beaten. Denaro was convicted in absentia for the murders of 2 anti-mafia prosecutors in 1992. The following year, he was implicated in deadly bombings in Milan, Florence and Rome. He once boasted he could fill a small cemetery with those he'd had killed. So why has it taken so long to find him? Well, one reason is that only these very old photographs of him existed, so police had to digitally age them in order to guess what he would look like today. Now they've caught him, they've immediately circulated this up-to-date photo of Italy's biggest mafia catch.
He kept for 30 years all the secrets about the collusion between the mafia and parts of the state and the political class.
In Palermo and across much of Italy, there is a collective sigh of relief. A notorious fugitive who seemed untraceable will now be facing justice. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Finally, there were many tributes today to one of the biggest film stars of the 1950s, 1960s, Gina Lollobrigida, who has died at the age of 95.
Crawl back into my bedroom, take advantage of my weakness!
He was one of the last survivors of the golden age of cinema, nicknamed by the Italians as La Lollo, and judged by some to be the most beautiful woman in the world. She co-starred with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Later in life, she became a successful sculptor and photographer and made several unsuccessful attempts to be elected to Parliament. Just turned 10:30. Let's have a look at the weather. It's Chris tonight. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Hugh. Well, freezing, bitter cold weather. That's here with us for a few days to come. But we did have some lovely sunshine, enjoying views like these. This is a snowy Skiddaw in Cumbria. Looks absolutely stunning. But the other issue we've been covering over recent days is the flooding issue. And of course, the flood warnings are still in force. The flooding problems haven't gone away. A lot of trouble on the Severn, the Avon, and for groundwater flooding across parts of the south. And after that wet weather, you can imagine a lot of water's coming in off the fields. That's just going to add to an ice risk, as well as these snow showers, which will continue to affect northwestern areas. Now, it is a freezing cold night. Right now, in Northumberland, we've got temperatures of -7. By the end of the night, probably -10 or so in the very coldest spots. But the frost widespread and sharp tomorrow morning, freezing cold. Northwesterly winds continue to feed in snow showers. So across the north and west of Scotland, for Northern Ireland and for the northwest of England, there will be some accumulations of snow, particularly over the hills through tonight and tomorrow. 5, maybe even 10 centimetres over modest hills. But the snow will come down to low elevations as well. There'll be a lot of sunshine away from those northwestern areas, but it won't do much for the temperatures. After that cold and icy start to the day, we're looking at highs of around 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. Now for Wednesday, we've got some slightly stronger winds. That will probably make it feel even colder. Again, we'll see showers around, some of them coming down the North Sea coast to affect eastern Scotland, eastern England, and 1 or 2 more for Wales and the southwest of England. Probably more of a mixture of rain, a bit of sleet and snow. But again, it's going to be another cold day, especially when you factor in the strength of those winds. But if you don't like the cold, well, eventually, as we head into the weekend, we do have some milder air trying to push in to western areas of the UK. The colder weather perhaps hanging on a bit longer across eastern areas, but eventually, quite a few of us will see temperatures get back into double figures into the weekend. Hugh.
There is hope. Chris, thanks very much. That's BBC News at 10 on Monday, the 16th of January. More analysis of the day's main stories, of course, as usual, on Newsnight. That's with my colleague Victoria Derbyshire. Victoria just getting underway on BBC Two right now. But here on BBC One, if you want the news where you are, well, our colleagues in the nations and regions standing by to bring you all the headlines there as well. But from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, thanks for watching and good night.